Sarah stood at the threshold of her grandmother's old estate, the weight of generations pressing down on her. The house, abandoned for years, seemed to whisper her name, calling her into its dark history. When the letter arrived, informing her of her inheritance, she thought she was merely stepping into a forgotten past. But as she walked through the crumbling halls, the presence of something far darker grew impossible to ignore. The dolls, thousands of them, watched her every move, their empty eyes promising nothing but dread. And with every passing day, Sarah realized the true price of what she had inherited. The curse of a family bound not by blood, but by a darkness that had never let go. She was the last of her line, and in the end, it wasn't just her grandmother's past that she would have to face, but her own. The letter came just after the rain had stopped, its contents both expected and unsettling. Sarah had never truly known her grandmother, Eleanor. Not in the way people knew their family. Their relationship had been distant, almost clinical. A series of postcards, annual birthday cards, and the occasional phone call filled the years between their meetings. When Eleanor had passed away, Sarah hadn't been surprised. What had come as a shock was the inheritance. She'd been called back to Winford, the town of her birth, a town she had left behind years ago, leaving its fog-shrouded streets and crumbling buildings in search of something else, something better. But now, here she was, driving through the same misty, winding roads that she'd once thought were the epitome of dullness, the town growing larger in her rearview mirror as her old family estate grew nearer. The estate itself was an imposing presence at the edge of the town, nestled on a hill overlooking the valley. It had always seemed like a place frozen in time, a forgotten relic from an era when opulence had been a badge of honor, not a burden. The mansion loomed through the thickening fog like a castle from a nightmare. Its stone facade, once pristine, was now covered in creeping ivy, and its windows, dark and uninviting, stared out like cold, unblinking eyes. Sarah had never understood why her grandmother chose to live there, away from the world, away from family. She'd heard the rumors, the hushed conversations between relatives, but nothing ever seemed to come of them. The house was as much a mystery as the woman herself. Eleanor had kept the estate hidden, sealed off from the world, just as she had kept herself hidden from Sarah. Now, as Sarah pulled her car into the long, twisting driveway, she was filled with an odd sense of dread. There was nothing particularly sinister about the estate itself, at least nothing that would explain the feeling crawling up her spine. But as she shut off the engine and stepped into the damp air, she couldn't shake the sensation that something about this place had always been wrong. That feeling only intensified as she made her way up the steps, the creak of the ancient wood beneath her boots echoing in the silent air. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and mildew. The grand chandelier in the foyer was shrouded in a heavy layer of grime, its once pristine crystals now dull and forgotten. A long staircase spiraled up, its wooden banister cold to the touch. The wallpaper, once vibrant with rich colors, had faded into an almost sickly shade of beige, its edges curling like the skin of something long dead. The house felt abandoned, even though it had been occupied just days before. Sarah stood there for a moment, the sensation of being watched creeping up her neck. She shook it off, attributing it to the silence of the house, the kind of silence that could make even the bravest feel vulnerable. A cold gust of wind swept through the open door behind her, and for a moment, Sarah thought she heard a faint sound, a whisper. She turned quickly, but the door was closed and the house remained as still as ever. She wasn't sure why she had even thought to listen. There was nothing to hear. "Sarah?" The voice came from the hallway, low and hesitant. It was her mother, Margaret, standing in the doorway of the study. Sarah forced a smile, though it felt foreign on her face. "I'm here, Mom." Margaret's face was pale, as though the house had already begun to drain the color from her. Her eyes, usually bright and warm, were dull, as if they'd seen too much. She stepped forward, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if the house were a living thing that could swallow her whole. I I still can't believe it, Margaret murmured, her voice shaky. Your grandmother, she never said anything about this. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure how to respond. She didn't know what to believe either. The will was clear. Eleanor had left everything to Sarah, the house, the land, the contents of the estate. But there had been no explanation, no indication of why she would have wanted Sarah to inherit it. Eleanor had never mentioned Sarah in any meaningful way during her lifetime, aside from the occasional letter. And yet, now, everything had been left in her care. Do you want to see the workshop? Margaret asked, as if she had read Sarah's mind. It's the one place she always told us to stay out of. Sarah stiffened at the mention of the workshop. She had heard about it over the years, though never directly from her grandmother. It was the one part of the house that was always off limits, the one room that seemed to hold a mysterious significance in all the stories Sarah had heard growing up. The attic was a shadow in the back of the house, a place where no one dared to venture. I think I'd like to see it, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure why she felt compelled to go there. Maybe it was the fear of the unknown. Maybe it was curiosity, that primal instinct that urged her to explore places she was told to avoid. Or maybe it was the unease she felt from her grandmother's presence still hanging heavy in the air. Margaret's face tightened, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw something dark flash in her mother's eyes, something filled with an ancient warning. But then it passed, and Margaret nodded, turning slowly toward the door at the end of the hall. Sarah followed her mother in silence, the old wood creaking beneath their feet. As they ascended the narrow stairs leading to the attic, Sarah couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. The air was thick with the weight of time. It felt as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The top of the stairs. Margaret hesitated before reaching for the handle of a door that looked like it had never been touched in years. The door groaned as it opened, revealing a room frozen in time. Inside, the workshop was a nightmare of forgotten artistry. Shelves lined the walls filled with wooden limbs, painted faces, and glass eyes. Dolls, hundreds of them. Some were unfinished, their limbs still rough and jagged, while others were disturbingly lifelike, their eyes cold and glassy, staring out at Sarah as though they knew her. The room smelled of old wood and something else, something faintly metallic. Your grandmother. She never wanted anyone in here, Margaret said, her voice distant, almost hollow. She always said it was cursed. Sarah took a slow, deliberate step forward, her gaze drawn to a figure standing in the center of the room. One doll, unlike the rest. Its eyes were too bright, too aware. Something about it seemed wrong. I don't think this is just a collection, Sarah murmured, feeling the hairs on her neck stand on end. What is this place? Margaret didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped back, her face pale, and muttered under her breath. It's the doll maker's curse, Sarah. You're not supposed to be here. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, the cold air pressing against her skin. The room was dim, lit only by the faint slivers of light that snuck in through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. It was as though the world outside didn't exist here. This room was a pocket of time where nothing ever moved, where nothing ever changed. Her mother, Margaret, stood behind her, clutching her arms tightly as though the weight of the room had already begun to crush her. She didn't speak, just watched Sarah, her expression unreadable. The dolls, hundreds of them arranged in meticulous rows like a strange and unsettling army, all turned toward Sarah. Some of the dolls were so finely crafted with porcelain, skin and delicate painted faces that looked more like human beings than toys. Others were unfinished, their limbs still bare and jagged, as if they had been abandoned in the middle of creation. But what struck Sarah most were their eyes. Every doll's eyes, from the perfect ones to the half-formed, seemed to follow her. They stared with an intensity that felt too real, too knowing. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the one standing at the center of the room. It was different from the others, the most lifelike by far. Its skin was flawless, its features so finely sculpted that for a moment, Sarah thought it might be real. A woman, dressed in a faded yellow dress, her dark hair tied back in a ribbon. The doll's eyes were wide and glassy, yet they gleamed with a strange, unnatural light. They didn't just look at Sarah. They studied her, the way a person would, study a new face as though recognizing something familiar. "Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as she took a slow step toward the doll. Who made these?" Margaret's face twitched, and for the first time since Sarah had arrived, the woman seemed truly afraid. She stepped forward, but only a few paces, as though hesitant to get any closer to the doll. "Your great-grandfather," she said in a low voice. Elias. Sarah had heard the name before, in the old family stories. He had been a doll maker, a craftsman with a reputation for creating lifelike dolls so beautiful that they were sought after by collectors and aristocrats across the country. But that was where the story ended. No one ever spoke about him after that. No one except for Eleanor. "You've heard of him," Margaret continued, her voice barely audible. "But what you don't know is that he wasn't just a craftsman. He was obsessed with creating life, with making dolls that were more than just inanimate objects. He wanted to bring them to life." The air in the room grew thick with an unspoken dread, and Sarah felt a chill slide down her spine. She couldn't look away from the doll in front of her, as though it were pulling her in, drawing her toward it. Is that what happened?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. Did he succeed?" Margaret hesitated, eyes darting nervously around the room. She seemed almost unwilling to continue, as though the very act of speaking the words would summon something from the darkness. But after a moment she spoke. "No," she said, almost too quietly to hear. "He didn't succeed, but he tried. And the dolls became something else, something he couldn't control." Sarah stepped closer, feeling an icy air emanating from the doll. Her pulse quickened as she reached out a hand toward The closer she got, the more she felt its presence, as though it were alive, aware of her. It was unsettling, but there was something compelling about it, something that urged her to touch it. Her fingertips brushed its cool porcelain cheek, and for a moment she could have sworn the doll's eyes flickered. Just a brief moment, but it was enough to make her pull her hand back, heart hammering in her chest. "Mom, what happened to him?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Margaret's face darkened, and for the first time since entering the room, she took a few steps backward, as if the dolls were closing in on her. "The curse," she whispered. He didn't just make dolls. He was obsessed with the idea of preserving life, of trapping souls in his creations. He thought that by transferring a piece of someone's soul into the doll, he could make live, even after death. Sarah stared at her mother, unable to believe the words. "You mean, like a voodoo curse? He was using magic?" Margaret nodded slowly, her eyes haunted. "Something like that. He wasn't just a doll maker. He was a sorcerer in his own way. He experimented with rituals, ancient texts, things he shouldn't have tampered with. He didn't just want to bring life to his dolls. He wanted to create immortality." A knot tightened in Sarah's stomach as the weight of her mother's words sank in. "But it went wrong." "Worse than wrong," Margaret murmured, glancing nervously at the other dolls. The dolls, they started changing. The souls he tried to trap inside them, they began to change too. They became restless, angry, vengeful. He couldn't control them. They wanted more than to just be trapped in porcelain bodies. Sarah shuddered, stepping away from the doll in the center of the room. The oppressive air seemed to tighten around her chest, as though the very walls were closing in. "What happened to him? Elias, I mean." Margaret's voice cracked. He disappeared. One night he was just gone, vanished. And so did all of his dolls. Eleanor, she locked the workshop and swore to never speak of it again. But we all knew something terrible had happened. Something unforgivable. Sarah took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady herself. The dolls seemed to mock her, their eyes following her every movement, waiting. And you didn't tell me about this? Sarah's voice was shaky. Why? Margaret's face twisted with guilt. I didn't want to burden you, Sarah. I thought it was just a story, a family curse we could forget. But I see now. She paused, as if unsure of how to finish But I see now that the curse isn't gone, it's still here, it's never left. A long silence hung between them. The dolls, it seemed, were watching them both, waiting. The heavy silence in the room was broken only by the faint creaks of the old wood as the house settled. Sarah stood frozen, the weight of her mother's words pressing down on her like a vice. The air was thick with dread, and the dolls, still unnervingly still, seemed to hold their collective breath, waiting for something to happen. Sarah felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The room around her, once just a strange relic of her family's past, now felt more like a tomb. Every shelf was lined with dolls, their faces etched in perpetual expressions, some serene, others twisted in grotesque smiles, but all unblinking, unyielding in their stare. You don't believe me, do you? Margaret's voice broke through Sarah's thoughts. She looked at her mother, who was now standing just inside the doorway, her face pale and drawn. Sarah shook her head, though her uncertainty weighed heavily in her chest. It's not that I don't believe you. It's hard to imagine. I mean, souls trapped in dolls? Magic? A curse? Margaret pressed her palms against the back of a dusty chair, her gaze distant as she began to speak again, her voice trembling with a fear she had clearly buried for years. It sounds insane, I know, she said. But it's the truth. Elias wasn't just a doll maker. He was obsessed with the idea of immortality. His obsession with life, true life, drove him to madness. But before any of that, he was a man of art, a man of skill. He had his workshop in the city, and his creations were revered. People came from all over to commission his dolls. They were lifelike, they were beautiful, and they were alive in a way. He could capture the very essence of a person and create something perfect. That was his gift. Margaret paused, her eyes clouded with memories she didn't want to relive. The first time I saw his work, I was a child. I remember walking into that workshop, the smell of wood, of oil paints, something strange, almost like a mixture of sweetness and decay. The dolls were all there, arranged in rows. They were so lifelike, but there was something in their eyes, something that made my skin crawl. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw Elias. He was standing in the center of the room, moving from doll to doll, adjusting. Their poses, their faces. Margaret's voice wavered, and Sarah could see that her mother was struggling to push through the fog of her own memories. She stepped forward, wanting to comfort her but afraid of what more she might hear. I don't know how long I stood there watching him, Margaret continued, her voice becoming more strained. But eventually, I saw something that made me understand. It was alive. There was one doll, one in particular, that stood apart from the others. It was a girl, dressed in a tattered red dress with pale, ghostly skin. Her eyes were open wide, unblinking. And they followed me. No matter where I went in the room, those eyes never left me. Sarah's heart began to pound in her chest. She glanced back toward the dolls, particularly the one in the center of the room, the one with the unsettlingly bright eyes. Her skin prickled. Could it be? Elias saw me staring at the doll, Margaret went on, her voice growing quieter. He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was like he knew something I didn't. He said, "You see her, don't you? She's alive." A shudder passed through Margaret as she recalled the moment. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant, but I knew something was wrong. Something wasn't right about the way he spoke. The dolls, they weren't just lifeless objects. They were vessels. Vessels, Sarah repeated, the word sending a chill through her veins. Yes, Margaret whispered. Vessels for souls. Sarah felt a sudden rush of coldness wash over her, the air in the room turning oppressive. She could barely breathe as she imagined what her mother was saying. You mean he was trapping people's souls in these dolls? Like some kind of dark magic? Margaret nodded grimly, her eyes glossing over with a mixture of grief and fear. That's exactly what he was doing. At first, it was a secret. He told me he was trying to preserve life, to keep people from dying. But after a while, I realized he wasn't just trying to save the living. He was obsessed with death itself. He wanted to keep people alive after they died, and he did it with his dolls, by trapping their souls inside the porcelain bodies. Sarah swallowed hard, trying to process what her mother was telling her. The thought was almost too much to bear. "So, the dolls, the ones in this room," she began slowly. They're not just made of wood and porcelain, are they?" "No," Margaret said. "They're more than that. They're tombs. Elias made them one by one, with the idea that by transferring pieces of people's souls into them, he could keep their essence alive. But it wasn't just the souls of the living. Some of the dolls were made from the souls of the dead." Sarah's head spun. She felt dizzy, as though the world around her had tilted slightly off balance. How did he do this? Margaret looked away, her eyes narrowing with discomfort. "I don't know the full extent of it, but there were rituals, ancient ones. They involved sacrifices, blood, offerings, and things I'm afraid to even think about. Elias had an obsession with death, with controlling it. He thought he could master it. But didn't he realize what he was doing?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Didn't he see that it was wrong?" Margaret's face softened, though the sadness was thick in her eyes. He didn't care, not in the end. Elias had gone too far. He was consumed by his own creation. The dolls began to move on their own. He could see them breathing, blinking. He was terrified, but he couldn't stop. And then something happened. One of the dolls, one of the souls, broke free. Sarah stepped back, a knot forming in her stomach. "What do you mean, broke free?" "I don't know," Margaret whispered, her voice strained. "But Elias disappeared. After that, the dolls, they kept changing. The souls inside them, they weren't just passive anymore. They wanted to take control. They wanted to escape." Sarah's blood ran cold. She looked over her shoulder at the rows of dolls staring so at her. The lifelike eyes seemed more intense now, more alive than ever. And then the strangest thing happened. A faint whisper echoed through the room, a sound so quiet that it might have been her imagination. But Sarah was sure of one thing. It came from the dolls. The whisper was so faint, Sarah almost convinced herself it was nothing, a trick of the wind, a rustle in the old house. But the longer she stood there, the clearer it became, like a distant murmur just on the edge of hearing, pulling her in. It was soft, almost pleading. She turned slowly, heart pounding, her eyes scanning the room. The dolls were as still as they had been moments before, their lifeless faces staring back at her, their eyes cold and unblinking. But now there was something different about them. They weren't just eyes anymore, they were eyes that knew, eyes that were alive. Every doll seemed to be watching her, as if waiting for her next move. Margaret's voice trembled from behind her. "You heard it, didn't you?" Sarah nodded, though she felt a cold sweat form on the back of her neck. She didn't want to turn around, didn't want to acknowledge the truth in her mother's voice, but she couldn't ignore. "It came from them, didn't it?" "Yes," Margaret whispered. "They're alive, not in the way we think. They're more than just vessels for souls. They're aware, and they want more. They've been wanting more ever since Elias left." Sarah's head was spinning. The idea of these dolls, these lifeless objects, having the ability to communicate, to whisper, it seemed impossible. Yet standing in this room with the air thick and oppressive, she couldn't deny it. The atmosphere was charged with something dark, something malevolent. She turned slowly toward the doll in the center of the room, the one that had caught her attention from the moment she entered. Its eyes seemed to glimmer, almost as if it were alive, aware. As Sarah stared at it, a feeling of unease crept into her chest. She couldn't look away. "Mom, I need to know more about Elias," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "What happened to him after he disappeared?" Margaret hesitated, her gaze drifting nervously toward the doll. We thought it was over. That whatever he had done, whatever curse he had unleashed, had finally run its course. But it wasn't. It never was. Sarah stepped closer to the doll, her feet dragging as if the room itself was trying to hold her back. She felt a strange pull toward it. Something deep, something primal. What do you mean? What happened to him? Margaret's eyes flicked to the doll in the center of the room and she swallowed hard. Elias, he was never really gone. The dolls, the souls inside them, they don't forget. They don't just lie dormant. They change. They evolve. Elias thought he was creating immortality, but all he did was bind the souls to the dolls. And when the souls took over, they started talking to him. At first it was just whispers like the one you heard. The room grew colder as Margaret spoke. Sarah could feel it, like a weight pressing down on her chest. The whispers seemed to grow louder, more distinct, though still just out of reach. She could feel the eyes of the dolls following her every movement, and it felt like they were speaking to her too, though she couldn't understand the words. What did they say? Sarah whispered, almost afraid to ask. Margaret's voice faltered, but she continued. They didn't speak directly, not at first, but Elias, he started to change. His obsession with immortality became worse. He began performing more rituals, dark, forbidden ones, to keep the dolls alive, to give them more power. He became one of them. I saw it with my own eyes. Sarah's eyes widened. He became one of the dolls. Yes, Margaret said, her voice barely audible. One night he performed a final ritual, one that no one, not even Elias, could control. He was changing. He didn't look the same, his eyes were like theirs, glassy, empty. But they followed me, like they followed you. Sarah shuddered, stepping back from the doll, but her gaze never wavered. What happened to him? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. When I tried to stop him, when I tried to reach him, he just vanished. No one saw him again. But after that night, the dolls, they began to move, and they became more aggressive. The souls inside them, they weren't content to just be trapped anymore. They wanted something. They wanted out. Sarah's heart raced and she suddenly felt the intense, suffocating urge to leave the room. But something kept her rooted to the spot. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the doll in the center, its glassy eyes now seeming to glitter, as though aware of her every thought. What happened to the dolls after Elias? Disappeared? Sarah asked, though she already had an idea of what the answer might be. They became restless, violent. They wanted to be free, to escape the confines of the porcelain. Some of them broke, but not all of them. Some were locked away, hidden, trapped. And that's when your grandmother locked this workshop, Sarah. She wanted to protect us. She wanted to keep us safe from what Elias had done. Margaret's voice cracked with emotion as she continued. But I think she knew the truth. I think she knew the curse would never be broken. That's why she kept everything hidden. She knew that one day, someone, you, would come here and open this door. Sarah stared at her mother, heart pounding. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but they made no sense. What kind of curse could persist for decades? What kind of evil could bind souls to dolls? And what had Elias truly done to himself in the end? I don't understand, Sarah murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Why now? Why are the dolls still watching? Margaret stepped closer, gripping Sarah's arm as though trying to keep her grounded. Because the curse never ended, Sarah. Elias's work didn't end with his disappearance. He transferred himself into the dolls. He became part of them. And now those souls, his soul, are still here. They are still waiting. A cold breeze swept through the room, rattling the windows as a low hum seemed to rise from the dolls. It was a sound too low to identify, but unmistakable in its malicious tone. Then Sarah heard it again, the whisper louder this time, almost like a voice speaking directly into her mind. Help us. Help him. Before Sarah could react, the room seemed to darken, and the air grew impossibly heavy. The doll's eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, as if they were no longer just watching but waiting for someone, to release them. The air in the workshop had grown thick, stifling, as if the very walls were closing in on Sarah. The faint whispers, now growing louder and clearer, seemed to swirl around her, filling her mind with an unsettling sense of urgency. They weren't just voices. No, this was something darker, something older. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribcage as the room seemed to shift. The dolls, their once blank expressions, now appeared eager. Their eyes glittered, reflecting the dim light as though they were alive in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah felt the weight of their gazes pressing against her, urging her forward, pulling her closer to the center of the room, toward the one doll she could never seem to stop staring at. "Mom, what do you mean Elias became one of them?" Sarah's voice was barely more than a whisper, as though speaking louder might shatter the fragile boundary between the living and the dead. Margaret stepped back, eyes wide with terror. I can't explain it fully, Sarah. It's not just about the dolls or the souls. It's what Elias was trying to achieve, the line between life and death. It blurred. That's what the curse is. The dolls, they're vessels, but they're also more than that. Elias used them as a conduit for his own spirit, and when he vanished, he didn't just disappear. He merged with them. Sarah's stomach churned, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She felt as though the dolls themselves were listening to every word her mother spoke, hanging on every syllable, and waiting for something. The whispers grew again, closer now, their source impossible to locate, but Sarah could feel it, like an invisible hand reaching into her thoughts. "Wait," Sarah breathed. "Are you saying Elias stayed in the dolls? That's why they move? And why they're still here?" Margaret nodded grimly, her face pale. "Yes, Elias became part of them. His soul, his consciousness. It's trapped in the dolls. The curse isn't just about death. It's about his eternal presence, and it's growing. The more souls he trapped, the stronger he became. The more aware they became." Sarah glanced nervously at the doll in the center of the room. The one in the yellow dress, the one she couldn't stop staring at. Her fingers tingled as though drawn by some unseen force. Slowly, as if controlled by something beyond her own will, she reached toward it. "No!" Margaret shouted, rushing forward, but she was too late. As Sarah's fingers brushed the doll's porcelain cheek, something shifted. The cold, lifeless skin of the doll suddenly felt too real, too alive. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that Sarah gasped, her breath fogged in front of her face. And then, just as her hand made contact, the whisper became a scream. A sharp, agonizing wail echoed in Sarah's mind. It was unlike anything she had ever heard, filled with desperation, rage, and something far worse. The dolls around her seemed to tremble, their eyes flickering with life, their faces contorting in silent agony. The air hummed, vibrating with the force of some unseen energy, and Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "Sarah, stop!" Margaret screamed, her voice frantic, but the words were lost beneath the deafening noise that filled the room. The doll in front of Sarah's hand twitched. Sarah recoiled, pulling her hand back, but it was too late. The once still doll's mouth stretched open in a silent scream, though no sound came. Its painted eyes flickered with unnatural life, staring directly at Sarah. Then, as if mocking her, the head tilted ever so slightly to the side. "It's alive," Sarah realized with a start. The doll was no longer just a doll. Something was in it. Something had awakened. The room seemed to pulse around her, and she could feel a tightening in her chest as the temperature continued to drop. The doll's eyes, their souls, were watching, waiting, and their collective energy began to suffocate her. She gasped for air, but it was as if the very atmosphere had turned against her. Then came another whisper, this one stronger, more direct, almost as if it was speaking in her very mind. Help him. You must help him. Free us. The voice was low and ancient, drenched with a desperation that sent shivers crawling up Sarah's spine. It was as if the doll was speaking to her, calling to her, offering her a chance, a way out. No, Margaret cried, her face twisted with fear and helplessness. Don't listen to them, Sarah. It's a trap. It's what they want. But Sarah couldn't stop herself. The pull was too strong, the allure of the voice too intoxicating. The doll's eyes burned with an eerie intensity, and for the first time, Sarah felt like she understood it. The whisper, the urgency. It wasn't just a plea, it was a command. With trembling hands, she reached out once again, this time more determined. The doll's features seemed to soften in response, its eyes lighting up in a way that felt like recognition. It was as if it was waiting for her touch, and then, in a split second, she felt a jolt, a shock, so powerful it rattled her entire being. It was as though the doll had opened something inside her, a doorway she didn't even know existed. A rush of images flooded her mind, flashes of faces twisted in agony, eyes pleading, trapped within the porcelain bodies. And then Elias, his face distorted, his eyes glowing, his body merging with the doll's. The final, terrible realization hit her. Elias hadn't just made dolls to trap souls. He had become one of them, a spirit chained to his own cursed creations. Sarah! Margaret screamed, but her voice felt distant, fading. The room began to spin, the edges of her vision blurring as the whispers crescendoed into a chorus of voices. Dolls, souls, and Elias, all speaking at once. Help us, free us. He cannot control us anymore. In that moment, Sarah realized what the dolls were truly asking for. Not just freedom, not just release from their porcelain prisons. They wanted control, and they wanted her to give it to them. The room was alive with noise now, though it wasn't real. It was in her head, in her blood, crawling under her skin. The whispers, louder than ever before, became a chorus, a maddening symphony of pleading voices, a cacophony of souls trapped. In porcelain, Sarah's vision swam as the faces of the dolls warped, their expressions twisting, their eyes now filled with anger, desperation, and something much worse, hunger. Her hand, still hovering over the doll, felt like it was being pulled by invisible strings, the porcelain cold beneath her fingers. The rush of images that flooded her mind, of Elias's tortured face, the lifeless bodies, the souls screaming in eternal torment, made her stomach churn. She tried to pull back, but the dolls round her seemed to grow heavier, as if the very weight of their gaze was suffocating her. Sarah, no, Margaret cried, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. She grabbed Sarah's arm, trying to pull her away, but the force of the pull was too strong. It was as if Sarah herself were now tethered to the dolls, bound by something unseen, something ancient. You must help us, the voice whispered again, clearer now. No longer a faint murmur, but an imperative command. It was coming from all directions, inside her head, outside, from every doll in the room, from Elias himself. The power behind the words was overwhelming, and for a moment Sarah felt herself losing control. But she resisted. She had to resist. No, she whispered through clenched teeth, forcing herself to focus, to remember the truth. This isn't right. The doll's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, its head tilting slightly, as if recognizing her resistance. The temperature in the room dropped further, the cold biting at her skin, numbing her fingers. It felt like the very essence of death was crawling into her veins. She couldn't breathe. The air was thick with malevolence. You have no choice, the voice came again. But this time it wasn't a plea. It was a threat. Before Sarah could react, the entire room seemed to tremble. The walls groaned as if the house itself were coming alive, pushing back against the curse that was beginning to claw its way out. She glanced at her mother. Margaret was pale, frantic, her eyes wide with terror. Sarah, listen to me, Margaret said, her voice shaking yet firm. You don't know what you're doing. Don't make the mistake I did." Sarah's mind reeled. "What do you mean?" she gasped. Her voice strained as she fought against the mounting pressure in her chest. Margaret's hands gripped Sarah's shoulders, her touch like ice. I thought I could control it. When I was younger, I tried to free them. I thought I could break the curse, that I could undo what Elias had done. But I was wrong. The dolls, the souls, they are not to be freed. They're trapped for a reason. And if you give in to them, they'll take you. They'll take us." Sarah's eyes darted back to the doll in her hand. It felt like it was breathing. Slow, deliberate, alive. She could see it now, clearer than ever. The thing inside the doll wasn't just Elias. It wasn't just the souls of the dead. It was something darker, something more ancient. And it was using her, twisting her mind, feeding on her fear. "Mom," Sarah said, voice trembling. "How do I stop it? How do I break the curse?" Margaret's face tightened with grief. "I don't know if it can be broken. Elias was a madman. He didn't understand what he was doing, but he wanted this immortality. But what he didn't understand was that he was feeding something older, something darker. The curse, it's not just about him. It's about the souls inside the dolls. They're trapped, and they feed on anyone who tries to free them." Margaret's eyes darted to the shelves, her gaze flickering nervously. Sarah followed her mother's eyes, but all she saw were the dolls, frozen in place, their eyes unblinking. But the air was thick now, as if the very presence of the dolls were pressing in on her from every angle. "You have to understand," Margaret continued, her voice breaking. "When I tried to free them, I made a pact. The dolls, they don't give up their souls easily. They can't be freed without something more, something in exchange. And Her mother's words caught in her throat, a tear slipping down her cheek. Sarah's blood ran cold. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Margaret's face paled even further, the horror of her own past surfacing. "I gave up my soul, Sarah. I tried to bargain with them. I tried to offer my soul in exchange for theirs. I thought I could save you. I thought I could stop the curse from spreading, but it didn't work. I couldn't free them. I couldn't save anyone. I only made the curse stronger." Sarah's stomach dropped. She stared at her mother, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. You sold your soul to them. You traded it?" Margaret nodded, her face contorted with regret. "I didn't know what else to do, but I failed. I couldn't break the curse, and now I can feel it. I can feel it coming back. The dolls, they don't just want freedom. They want us. And if you make the wrong move, if you give them what they want, they'll take us both." Sarah felt the weight of her mother's words sink in, the oppressive air growing even heavier. The whispers, the voices, they were stronger now, more insistent, more hungry. She felt her strength wavering, her willpower trembling under the relentless pressure. The dolls weren't just asking for freedom. They were demanding something more. And if Sarah didn't act now, the curse would claim them both. The doll in her hand suddenly moved, just a slight shift of its head, but it was enough. Enough to make her heart stop. The voice inside her head screamed, "Help him, release him." The doll's eyes locked with hers, and in that moment Sarah understood. The curse was never about freedom. It was never about releasing souls from their prison. It was about taking control. The dolls weren't the prisoners. She was. The doll in Sarah's hands had become a living nightmare. The cold porcelain, which had once seemed lifeless, now pulsed with an unnerving energy. It was no longer just a doll. It was a conduit, a vessel, and worst of all, it was aware. Its eyes gleamed with an ancient malevolence, and Sarah could feel it pulling on her, as though trying to force its way into her very soul. The whispers were growing louder, a symphony of voices, each one vying for her attention, each one begging for freedom, for release. And then the voice that had been calling to her, the one she had heard the moment she touched the doll, spoke again. "Help him. Free us. We will make you whole." The words echoed in Sarah's head, and for a moment she nearly gave in. The promise of power, of control, was so tempting. But deep down, she knew it was a lie. The dolls didn't want freedom. They didn't want release. They wanted dominion. And if she didn't act soon, they would consume her completely. "Mom, what do I do?" Sarah gasped, her hand trembling as she held the doll, feeling it beat like a heart against her palm. "What did you mean by a pact? What did you do to make them stop?" Margaret's face was a mask of sorrow and fear. Her lips trembled as if trying to find the right words. She stepped closer to Sarah, her voice low and desperate. "The pact, Sarah. It was a binding. A way to trap the curse in one soul so that it wouldn't spread. But it wasn't just any soul, it was my soul. I thought I could control it. I thought if I offered them something in exchange for their freedom, I could make it stop. But the curse, it changed me. It changed everything." Sarah's mind raced. The weight of her mother's words settled over her like a cold, suffocating fog. Her mother had given up her soul to protect her, to stop the dolls from taking over. But in doing so, she had made herself a prisoner, bound to the curse forever. And now, Sarah realized, the dolls wanted her to make the same sacrifice. They wanted her soul. "Mom, how do I break it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. She felt her throat tighten as the pull of the doll intensified, the whispers now growing into a thunderous roar. "How do I stop them?" Margaret's eyes darkened with the weight of the curse, and she shook her head. "You can't break it, Sarah. No one can. The curse is older than anything we understand." Elias didn't know what he was doing when he started. He didn't realize that by creating the dolls, he was binding not just souls, but the very essence of life itself. The dolls are part of the curse now. They are alive, in a way. And they don't just want freedom, they want to take the living. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she felt the coldness of the room close in around her. The walls seemed to shift, the shadows growing darker, as though the very house itself was coming alive with the curse. The doll's eyes followed, her every movement, their heads turning slowly, impossibly, their lips unmoving but still speaking to her. "Mom, please," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "There has to be a way." Margaret's face softened with regret, but there was no hope in her eyes. "There's only one way, Sarah. The ritual." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What ritual?" Margaret closed her eyes as though steeling herself against the truth she was about to say. "A binding ritual. The only way to stop the curse from consuming us both is to take control of it, to bind it to one soul. But it requires a sacrifice, a voluntary sacrifice, and it's not something anyone can come back from." "Sacrifice?" Sarah repeated, her heart pounding in her chest. The very thought of giving up her own life to stop the curse seemed impossible. But she couldn't ignore the truth. The dolls were feeding on her. They wanted her, and if she didn't act now— Margaret's voice trembled as though admitting the horror of it pained her. "The ritual can only be completed if someone volunteers. If you offer your soul to the curse, the dolls will bind themselves to you. They'll stop trying to take us, but you'll be trapped with them. Trapped in their prison, forever." The weight of those words landed on Sarah like 1,000 tons. Forever, trapped, her soul bound to the dolls for all eternity. It was unthinkable. But then she remembered the faces, the souls inside the dolls. Elias, his desperate, twisted expression, and all the others, the souls who had been trapped within those porcelain bodies, their lives stolen, their bodies forever encased in lifeless shells. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "You said they were trapped, but what if we could break it without a sacrifice?" Margaret shook her head, her eyes full of sorrow. "There is no breaking it, Sarah. Not without a sacrifice. And there's no way to destroy them without one." For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The air around them grew still, the whispers fading into an eerie silence. Then suddenly the room seemed to shift again. The doll's eyes grew even, brighter, glowing in the dim light of the workshop. And then they all moved, slowly at first, as if awakening from a deep slumber. Their heads turned, their bodies creaked, their porcelain limbs shifted, and the room was filled with the sound of movement. But not just any movement. The dolls were walking. Sarah's heart raced. No, 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 she breathed. She had to stop them. She had to act. But then something inside her stirred. Something darker. The doll in her hands, the one that had started it all, began to twist. The porcelain cracked, its features warping, its face shifting, its eyes opening wide in grotesque delight. Sarah could feel its power surge, its will pushing against her own. "Sarah, you have a choice," the voice whispered, clear as day now. "The dolls want freedom, and we will offer it to you. We will make you whole again." The doll's mouth opened, and for the first time, it spoke. "Become one of us." And in that moment, Sarah realized what she had to do. The ritual had begun. Whether she accepted it or not, the dolls were not going to stop until they had claimed her, until they had bound her to them. The air in the workshop had become suffocating, thick with the weight of impending doom. The dolls, those cursed, twisted creations, moved now, slowly and deliberately, their porcelain eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Their heads turned in unison towards Sarah, as if they were waiting. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the power of the doll in her hand seeping into her very bones. It was cold, an icy, unrelenting chill that seemed to burn through her veins, as if it was trying to possess her from the inside out. "Become one of us," the doll's voice echoed in her mind, its words heavy, commanding. "We are not just souls, we are eternity, we are immortal." She gasped, her hand tightening instinctively around the doll as if to crush it, to destroy it. But no matter how hard she tried, it wouldn't break. It refused to break. The porcelain, once so fragile, had become solid, unyielding, as though it were a living thing, alive and breathing in the palm of her hand. Sarah stumbled back, trying to tear herself away from the doll, from the curse that was threatening to consume her. She could hear the whispers again, louder than before, rising up in a choir of voices, all clamoring for her attention. They spoke in unison, their words a mixture of pleading, rage, and hunger. "Free us. Free him." The voice of Elias now dominated the chorus, his tone raw and desperate. "You don't understand, Sarah. If you don't help us, the curse will consume you just as it consumed me. We are trapped here, lost in this endless prison. But you don't have to do it." Margaret's voice cracked through the madness. She grabbed Sarah by the shoulders, her hands trembling. "You don't have to make the sacrifice. You can still save yourself." But Sarah could feel the pull, the magnetic force drawing her in. The dolls were all around her now, encircling her, their eyes unblinking, their painted faces cold but somehow alive. They were waiting for her to make a choice. The choice that would either save her or damn her forever. "Sarah, listen to me," her mother pleaded, her voice cracking with terror. "The dolls, they're not just seeking freedom, they're seeking control, power. If you offer them your soul, they will enslave you. They will twist you into something else, something horrible. The curse doesn't just trap souls, it feeds on them. The more they collect, the stronger they become." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What do they want from me?" Margaret stepped closer, her face pale and drawn. "They want control, Sarah. They want to use your soul to fuel their power. They want to become whole again. Elias, he didn't just create the dolls to trap souls. He created them to hold the curse itself. And once you give them your soul, once they own you, the curse will be unstoppable. The dolls, the curse, will spread, and it will never stop. Not until the world is covered in darkness." Sarah felt a wave of cold dread wash over her. The dolls' eyes were burning with intensity now, their mouths unmoving, but somehow laughing, in the silence of her mind. She was starting to understand the true horror of what had been done. She was the key. She was the one who could end the curse, or become its latest victim. The doll in her hand shifted again. Its porcelain cracked and splintered, and for a moment Sarah could see something beneath it. Flesh, Elias's eyes, burning, furious, stared back at her. And she saw it, clearer than ever. The curse wasn't just about the dolls. It was about him. His spirit had been trapped in the dolls, yes, but it was more than that. He had sacrificed himself, merged his very being with the cursed creations in an attempt to achieve immortality. But instead, he had become a prisoner, locked inside the dolls, bound to the curse forever. "Help me, Sarah," Elias's voice pleaded, raw and tormented. "Help me free them, free us." But Sarah's mind was clearer now. She saw the truth. Elias's soul had been trapped, yes, but it wasn't just him. It was every soul the dolls had ever claimed. They had all become part of the curse, part of something far darker than any of them had understood. "You're lying," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "You're all lying." The doll's head tilted, as if in response. Its eyes gleamed, with a malice that was almost sentient. "We do not lie," it whispered. "We simply offer what you seek. Power, freedom, immortality." The room grew darker. The shadows stretched toward her, curling around her like living tendrils. She could feel it now, the force that had been driving her all along. The whispers, the lure, the pull. It was all part of the curse. The dolls weren't just asking for release, they wanted to merge with her. They wanted to become one with her. Margaret grabbed Sarah's hand, her grip desperate, shaking. "Please, Sarah, don't do it. Don't make the same mistake I did. They will consume you. Once you make the sacrifice, you will be lost to them. They won't stop, Sarah. They will never stop." For a moment, Sarah was paralyzed, caught between the overwhelming desire to end the curse and the fear of what she might become. The weight of the decision was suffocating. Her mother's pleading eyes, the memory of her grandmother's warnings, the voices of the trapped souls, all of it swirled inside her head, pulling her in different directions. Then suddenly, something within her snapped. The whispers ceased. The pressure in her chest lifted, and Sarah found herself standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into the abyss. The dolls, they weren't the key. She was. She had a choice. She could take the curse upon herself, sacrifice everything, and bind herself to the dolls forever. Or she could break the curse, once and for all. Taking a deep breath, Sarah turned toward the center of the room, where the oldest doll stood, its face cracked and worn. The one she had first touched, the one that had begun it all. She had to end it. There was only one way. But to do that, she would have to make the ultimate sacrifice, a sacrifice of herself. She had to destroy the curse, or she would become its final prisoner. "Now, Sarah," the voice of Elias whispered in her mind, almost tender. "Now is your time." But this time, Sarah was ready. The room was silent now, eerily so. The air had become thick with the weight of anticipation, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for Sarah's decision. The dolls stood frozen, their eyes gleaming with hunger, their painted lips unmoving yet somehow alive, watching her every move. The echoes of their whispers were gone, replaced by an almost suffocating stillness. Sarah felt the coldness in her bones, the icy grip of the curse tightening around her. Her mother's words still rang in her ears. "Don't make the same mistake I did." But the weight of the decision, the responsibility for all those souls trapped within the dolls, pressed down on her like an immovable force. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't walk away from it. "There's only one way," her mother had said. And she was right. Sarah had been foolish to think there was another option, a way to escape without paying the price. She was the key. But the curse was not something that could be defeated with mere resistance. It wasn't enough to fight it off. It had to be undone, eradicated from the root. The only way to destroy the curse now was to take it on herself, to accept what Elias had once embraced, the merging of her soul with the dolls. A shudder ran through Sarah as she stepped forward, her breath slow and steady, her heart hammering. In her chest, she could feel it now, the pull of the doll in her hand. It had grown heavier, its porcelain surface now warm against her skin, as though it were alive, its very presence feeding off her fear. She knew what she had to do. She had to destroy the heart of the curse, the oldest doll. Its cracked, weathered face staring back at her was the heart of the curse. This was the one Elias had created first. the one that had started it all. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, almost as though it were waiting, anticipating her decision. As Sarah approached, she felt the darkness press against her, as if the curse were wrapping itself around her, tightening its grip. Her throat tightened and her pulse quickened. The curse was alive, and it wanted her, it needed her. "Sarah," a voice rasped in her ear, Elias's voice, raw with desperation. "You don't have to do this. You can join us. Become one of us. We will give you power. We will make you immortal." Her breath caught in her throat. The temptation was strong, she could almost feel it. The promise of freedom, of power. The doll's eyes seemed to burn into her soul, pulling her closer, feeding on her uncertainty, on her fear. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking but determined. "I won't be your prisoner." The doll's mouth twisted into a smile, and Sarah could see the twisted form of Elias in its cracked, painted face. "It's not a choice, Sarah. You already are a prisoner. You always have been." The darkness around her surged. She felt herself faltering, felt the coldness creeping into her bones. It was so easy to give in, to accept the power, to let the curse take her. So easy. And yet, she glanced at her mother. Margaret stood at the edge of the room, her eyes filled with fear and love, her face pale, as if she too could feel the weight of the curse closing in on them. "Sarah," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you don't have to do this. There's another way." Sarah shook her head, her eyes now locked with the doll in her hands. The whispers had returned, louder than before, filling her mind with promises, with lies. "I can end this," Sarah said, her voice stronger, now her resolve hardening like iron. "But I need to destroy the heart of the curse, and that means sacrificing myself." Margaret's face contorted with grief. "No, Sarah, please. I can't lose you. You're my daughter. Please don't do this. I can't live with that." But Sarah didn't hear her. The air was thick, with the curse now, the oppressive darkness closing in. The room spun, the walls seeming to shrink, and the whispers turned into howls of rage. The doll's eyes glowed brighter, the power of the curse now fully awakened, fully alive. She knew what she had to do. She had no other choice. With a final, determined breath, Sarah took the doll, the oldest one, the source of the curse, and lifted it high. As she did, she could feel the weight of the dolls around her, the souls within them reaching out for her. They were trying to stop her, trying to pull her back into their grasp. The coldness was unbearable now. Her skin felt as if it were on fire, and her mind was drowning in the screams of those trapped inside the dolls. But through it all, she stayed focused. She had made her decision. She stepped forward, and with all the strength she could muster, she threw the doll into the center of the room. It shattered on the floor with a deafening crack, its porcelain pieces scattering in every direction. But even as it shattered, something dark, something alive, rose from the broken doll. The curse was not just in the dolls, it was inside her now. Her vision blurred as the darkness crept in, as the ancient power of the curse began to consume her. The room spun, and she felt herself falling into an abyss of darkness and pain. She could hear the voices of the trapped souls, their cries of anguish, their endless suffering. But through it all, she could feel a shift, a tug, as though the curse was pulling away from her, no longer feeding off her fear, no longer controlling her. She gritted her teeth, determined not to let go, not to surrender. "Sarah," Elias's voice called to her one last time, softer now, almost pleading. "Please, you can join us. You can be one of us." But Sarah's heart was resolute. She could feel the power of the curse fading, unraveling as the bond between her and the dolls began to break. She had done it. She had destroyed the heart of the curse. But in doing so, she had sacrificed herself. The darkness swirled around Sarah, thick and suffocating, closing in on her like a living thing. She could feel it inside her, cold, sharp, an icy grip on her soul. Her body trembled as the curse clawed at her, trying to take root, trying to possess her. The whispers returned, louder now. echoing in her mind like 1,000 tortured voices, each one vying for her attention, each one begging her to join them, to surrender. You've already done it, Sarah. You can't escape. You are ours. You will never leave us. But through the haze of darkness, through the suffocating pressure, something inside Sarah fought back. Something that had been ignited when she made her choice, when she shattered the heart of the curse. She had chosen to destroy it, to end it. And now, as the cursed power writhed within her, she knew that the final release was within her grasp. The pain was unbearable. Her body felt as though it was being torn apart, her soul warring against the overwhelming tide of darkness threatening to consume her. But Sarah's will, her determination, remained unbroken. The power of the curse wanted her to yield. It wanted to break her, to make her one of them. But Sarah would never be their prisoner again. Her mother's voice echoed, in her ears a distant whisper. You don't have to do this, Sarah. You don't have to become one of them. You can still fight, you can still win. But Sarah knew the truth now. The curse wasn't something that could be defeated with resistance alone. It had to be released. It had to be destroyed. The souls trapped inside the dolls, all of them, had to be freed. And it wasn't just her soul she had to save. It was all of theirs. With one last, desperate gasp, Sarah forced her hands to the sides of her head, clutching at her skull as though trying to tear the curse from her very mind. The dolls, their faces now twisted and grotesque, closed in on her, their eyes wide with hunger. But she didn't falter. She couldn't falter. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. The ground beneath her trembled, the walls of the workshop groaning as if they, too, were fighting against the curse. The shadows in the room stretched and writhed, pulsing with malevolent energy. But Sarah held firm. She focused. The dolls' eyes glowed brighter, their porcelain faces now alive with malice, their mouths twisted into mocking grins. Elias's voice echoed in her mind, desperate and raw. Sarah, please, don't do this. You don't understand. We can give you power. We can make you whole. But Sarah's heart was set. She was no longer afraid. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. She could feel the curse shattering inside her, as though the very fabric of it were tearing apart, like a fragile web unraveled by an unstoppable force. With a strangled cry, she released it. She reached deep within herself, pulling the darkness from her chest, from her soul, and with one final, wrenching effort, she cast it out. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The air became still. The room was silent. Then the curse exploded. It wasn't an explosion of fire or light. It was an explosion of sound, a deafening, shrieking sound, like 1,000 souls screaming as they were torn from their prison, their suffering at last coming to an end. The dolls, once lifeless and still, convulsed violently. Their porcelain faces cracked and shattered, their eyes no longer glowing with malice, but with an overwhelming sense of release. The darkness that had once consumed the room now fled, dissipating, like smoke in the wind. The weight that had been pressing down on Sarah, that had been suffocating her very being, vanished in an instant, leaving her breathless, her body trembling with exhaustion. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, her mind spinning with the aftermath. The pain, the agony, was gone. The curse had ended. The souls of the dolls had been freed. The house, once suffused with the dark energy of the curse, now felt quiet, peaceful even. But even as the last remnants of the curse faded, Sarah felt a lingering sense of loss, of emptiness. She had saved them. She had saved the souls trapped in the dolls. But in doing so, she had sacrificed herself. The weight of her decision settled heavily on her chest, and she realized for the first time the price of freedom. The sound of footsteps reached her ears. Sarah looked up to see her mother, standing at the edge of the room, her face pale and tear-streaked. Margaret was still alive, still here. The curse was over. Sarah, Margaret whispered, her voice trembling. You did it. You ended it. Sarah forced a weak smile, but she could feel the heaviness in her chest. The curse had been broken, but she knew she could never go back to the life she had known. She had done what was necessary, but the cost had been high. Margaret knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you from this." Sarah shook her head, the exhaustion finally taking hold of her body. She felt lightheaded, her vision blurring. But there was no fear, no regret in her heart. The curse was gone, the dolls were gone, the souls were free. And in that moment, as the light from the shattered windows of the workshop poured in, Sarah realized that she had given everything for the ones she loved. Her mother, her grandmother, the souls trapped in the dolls. They were all free now. She had saved them all. As Sarah closed her eyes for the last time, she heard one final whisper. "Thank you." And then there was nothing but peace. The darkness is finally gone, but the question remains, was it worth the cost? As Sarah's sacrifice echoes through the walls of her grandmother's haunted estate, a lingering silence falls over the house, and over you, the reader, the curse has been broken. The souls trapped within the dolls are free. But what of Sarah? Her journey, her pain, her final choice. Can we truly call it a victory? Now it's your turn to step into the story. What would you have done in her place? Would you have faced the darkness knowing the price of freedom? Or would you have turned away from the curse, letting it consume everything you loved? The dolls still whisper in the shadows, waiting. And the house is still alive. Its secrets are waiting to be uncovered. The auction for Sarah's soul has ended, but the haunting is far from over. The choice is yours. Will you dare to return, or will you leave the curse to claim another? The Dollmaker's Curse is not just a story, it's a legacy.